Let's say that I decide to take up an interest in swimming. So I start by watching some swimming matches on TV. And then I go and I watch some swim meets. And I decide now to go and watch the practice times of really good swimmers. So then I decide I want to get really good at this. So I start to read articles and books and watch webinars and interviews. And now I decide, I want to go even further than that. So I start to watch different world events and Olympics. And now I'm going to meet with some of those that are involved with those things. So I even go and I start to meet with some world-class athletes. And I meet with various coaches and even athletes like Michael Phelps. So I'm doing all this and I learn the best techniques. I find out, how is it that I'm supposed to breathe? How is it that I am supposed to move, and when I'm coming towards the wall that I turn? What's the best way to turn, and what's the best way to kick off, and how do I move under the water before I even take that next breath? What's the best way to be outside the water before I jump in, so that way I get the best jump? And then how do you jump best at the gun? I learned many different skills. I even learned what's best to wear and how to shave properly so I have the least amount of resistance. I'm learning lots and lots about what there is of swimming. I study and I gain information. I could pass on a lot of valuable information to others. And I could probably be helpful to them about knowing about swimming. And if you don't know me super well, you might even think that I'm a world-class swimmer, and I could even maybe start to believe this about myself with my knowledge. There's only one problem, however. I haven't gotten in the water yet. I haven't started seeing how long I can hold my breath and how I can move or actually do any of the things that I've learned. I can have a lot of insights and knowledge, and maybe even enough to encourage someone else. The only problem is I haven't begun to put any of it into practice for myself. I can believe all that I want that I am a world-class swimmer, but until I actually start putting any of that knowledge into practice, I'm only deceiving myself and maybe a few of the people around me. I want to look at a few verses in James today. James 1, verses 22 through 27, and then 2, 12 to 17 here. All right, so James 1, starting at verse 22, says, "But be doers of the word, and not merely hearers who deceive themselves. For if any are hearers of the word and not doers, they are like those who look at themselves in a mirror. For they look at themselves and, on going away, immediately forget what they were like. But those who look into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and persevere, being not hearers who forget, but doers who act, they will be blessed in their doing. If any think they are religious, and do not bridle their tongues, but deceive their hearts, their religion is worthless. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this: to care for orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself unstained by the world." Now moving on to chapter 2, verse 12. "So speak, and so act as those who are to be judged by the law of liberty. For judgment will be without mercy to anyone who has shown no mercy. Mercy triumphs over judgment. What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith, but do not have works? Can faith save you? If a brother or sister is naked and lacks daily food, and one of you says to them, 'Go in peace, keep warm and eat your fill,' and yet you do not supply their bodily needs, what is the good of that? So faith, by itself, if it has no works, is dead." Throughout James's letter, there is a tragedy. And the tragedy is, there are those who claim to have faith, but yet there is no works. There's no transformation taking place. And James says that they are not saved. And some might have a problem with this and say, "But hold on a minute. I said a prayer one time, and so therefore I should have fire insurance." Perhaps they do not recall Jesus' words in Matthew 7:21. "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father in heaven. There's that word does again. But I just want my faith to be private. I want it to be just something between me and God. I mean, I say a prayer every once in a while, and I even go to church sometimes. Too many of us try to compartmentalize our life, and the problem is, if you aren't going to really give God access to your life, what kind of a relationship is that? The Bible doesn't say a prayer, and you're saved for all eternity. In Luke 9:23, Jesus said, if any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. Daily? Did he just say daily? Not just a few times a year, because it's always been about relationship. You don't have a great relationship with your spouse or your kids because you choose to get together with them a few times a year. Or let's say, I'm going to choose to get together with them for a 1 to 2 hour period one time per week. Of course, there are people who do that though with their relationship with God. What kind of relationship is that? What kind of lasting, loving, thriving, growing relationship could be built on that? And yet, if you're in Christ, you know what Jesus calls you. He calls you his bride and his very own body. We're to be connected to each other as we are part of this body together, and hopefully we're following where the head would lead us. We also want to be, as a bride, lost in our love for our bridegroom. In Matthew 28, when Jesus gives the Great Commission, he doesn't say, go make converts. Go get people to say a prayer or make a one-time confession. He says, go therefore and make disciples. Now, I'm not saying that it doesn't start with a prayer, that it doesn't start with a confession, with a turning towards God, but I am saying that it is a continuous journey. He's the vine and we are the branches. May we continually stay connected, that we might abide in him. Yes, we are saved by grace, and grace alone. We can't take credit for it. It is God's work that we get to receive through faith. And the Bible calls Abraham basically the father of faith. And you know what? Abraham, he couldn't take credit for it because it was God's work. If Abraham was justified by works, he would have had something to brag about, but he couldn't. It was Abraham's faith that was reckoned unto him as righteousness. I learned Ephesians 2:8 and 9 many years ago when I was a kid, and it was also one of those verses that you learned when you were going to be witnessing to someone. Ephesians 2:8 and 9 says, for by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not your own doing. It is the gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast. And that is awesome. We didn't earn it. It's God's doing. Just like Abraham, we believe in faith, and the grace of God justifies it. How often do we read this and continue on to the next verse? How often do we read verse 10 with it? So let's go ahead and read it with verse 10. For by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not your own doing. It is the gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast. For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. Paul makes it clear that the riches of God's grace and God's grace alone save us, but how many people in our world stop there? They may claim, I'm saved by grace, and then there's no life change. There's no transformation that takes place. They don't really look or act or respond any differently than anyone does in the world. Paul stated we are saved by grace. For what? We were created in Christ Jesus for good works. Wait, so when I am saved by the awesome grace of God, I am God's workmanship. I am now a new creation. Those who were part of the old order were dead in their sins and trespasses. But if you're a new creation, your life is now characterized by good works. not works that are performed to secure your salvation, but they are the fruit of your salvation. Remember in Matthew 7 verse 16? Jesus said, you will recognize them by their fruits. To have godly fruit is to reflect the character of God. Back to what I began with today, I talked about learning absolutely everything I could about swimming. Enough, I was probably even able to help some others by it. However, I never put it into practice. I didn't do it. I could go around claiming I am a great swimmer, and maybe some people would believe me because of my knowledge, but I'm not actually doing it. Yet, do we have people in our world? Do we have people in our churches who are doing that? You may have great knowledge about beliefs. You may have listened to a lot of sermons, but until you actually start to do it, what is it really doing for you? I remember reading a quote years ago that said, you only believe the parts of the Bible that you do. And if I actually look at my life and what parts of the Bible am I actually doing, am I actually practicing, that could hurt sometimes. Do I really believe it? Am I actually doing it? And sometimes it might be good to examine ourselves. What is it that I believe? What is it that I'm actually putting into practice and doing? When we started reading in James, it was chapter 1, verse 22, which says, but be doers of the word and not merely hearers who deceive themselves. This is very similar to Romans 2, verse 13, which says, it is not the hearers of the law who are righteous in God's sight, but the doers of the law who will be justified. To be a hearer and a doer is to be someone who perseveres in becoming more like Christ. To be a hearer only is to deceive yourself. And Jesus talked about those who deceive themselves by using the word hypocrisy. Mm-hmm. James uses the visual of looking in a mirror. When you look in the mirror, do you just look and then go away and completely forget what you look like? Or do you do something about it? Let's say you have a job interview and you really want to nail this job. You want to get this job. So you go and you look in the mirror and you see your hair is a mess, your tie is not straight, your shirt is all wrinkled, and then you just go ahead and you go and you try to nail this interview. Of course you wouldn't do that. Why wouldn't you? Because it's important to you. It's so easy for us to see something like a promotion as important. And yet, in the reality of eternity, how important is our spiritual formation? How important is our relationship with Jesus? How important is it for you and me to be continually molded as clay, to be more and more like, hopefully, our greatest love, Jesus? When I look in the mirror, do I see my own sinfulness and do nothing about it? Or does it drive me to repentance? When I look in the mirror, do I see what God has made me to be made in His image and not let that shape my life? Or do I draw nearer, pressing in, allowing His image to continually be formed in me? James continues in chapter 1 talking about the tongue, saying, if any think they are religious and do not bridle their tongues, but deceive their hearts, their religion is worthless. Ouch, nothing hurts as much as the truth. It's worthless? I've known quite a few people who say, I'm a Christian, I love Jesus, and yet you would never know it if you listen to them regularly talk. Are any of us perfect? Of course we aren't. But hopefully we are on the journey to become holy as He is holy. How many people claim something, but their actions, their life, show something different? What is your speech like? What is mine like? Are we reflecting the character of God when we're speaking? I recently read an article that talked about how complaining physically rewires your brain to be anxious and depressed. Again, the article I read stated how complaining physically rewires your brain to be anxious and depressed. We all might need to vent to someone occasionally, but then, do we move on? do we try to come up with solutions. Negativity physically destroys your brain. According to a doctor at UC Berkeley, it can release the hormone cortisol, which literally eats away at the hippocampus, which is part of the brain engaged in visual spatial memory, as well as memory for context and setting. Plus, negative thinking reinforces neural pathways associated with that emotion, which can make it an automatic reaction. However, did you know that that is true for any type of thinking? If you choose to regularly be grateful and choose to look at the positive, it will become your automatic reaction. And you will be less likely to notice much of the negative. So science is just confirming what the Bible has told us all along. The Bible has told us what? Even in hard times, what? Consider it all joy. Rejoice when things are going well? No, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I'll say it, rejoice. And even telling us what to focus on, what is good, what is lovely, what is trustworthy and upright. These are the things to focus on. Science is agreeing once again with the Bible. James is writing of how critical our tongue is, and science agrees. Let us be careful to catch ourselves when we start to complain, when we start to gossip, when our speech does not glorify Christ. James 1 ends by saying, religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this, to care for orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself unstained by the world. Is God's heart becoming more and more our heart? Does it show in how we care for others? It is not easy to be unstained by the world. But what are we doing to guard our heart and our mind? Does what you listen to, what you watch, what you read, what you focus on, do those things conform you more into the image of the world? To keep oneself unstained by the world, it might mean making some lifestyle changes, and most of us don't like change a whole lot. And yet, if I want to be in better physical shape, I can't sit around, eat donuts and ice cream, and just sit all day long and be a picture of great health. But yet, how often do we treat our mental self, our emotional self, and our spiritual self that way? We may need to make changes that at first are hard, but could become a lifestyle. Not just being hearers of the word, but doers as we let it shape us, as we're molded day by day into the image of Jesus. We read James 2, starting in verse 12, which says, so speak and so act as those who are to be judged by the law of liberty, for judgment will be without mercy to anyone who has shown no mercy. Mercy triumphs over judgment. Again, how we talk, how we behave, how we love matters. And James continues, what good is it, my brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith but do not have works? Can faith save you? If a brother or sister is naked and lacks daily food, and one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm and eat your fill, and yet you do nothing to supply their bodily needs, what is the good of that? So faith by itself, if it has no works, is dead. James is Jewish. He is writing to the Jewish community. His readers, his hearers, they would hear works and definitely connect to the works of the Torah, but through the lens of Jesus. The law, which was repeated daily and was summed up as the greatest command by Jesus, was to love God with all. Love God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, your strength, and to love others as yourself. To have a life that is shaped by following Jesus must follow these core teachings, these greatest commandments. We already said we're to be made in God's character and his likeness. I could say I love someone, but how much does that really mean? Not much if there are no actions to accompany my words. God is love. He could have just said, I love you, but yet Romans 5:8 says, but God demonstrated his own love for us in this, while we were sinners, Christ died for us. God could have said, I love you, I care about you, and then stayed far away. But no, he proved his love by his works, by his actions. James says that someone is naked and they have no food. This is an image of shame and defenselessness. And I come along and I see this person and, I hope you feel better. Oh, go keep warm and be well fed. God bless you. And yet I do nothing to help their situation, to actually help them. What is the good of that? Do our actions match our words? John 13, verse 34 and 35 says, I give you a new commandment, that you love one another, just as I have loved you. You also should love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. People aren't going to know that I'm a great swimmer by me explaining to them every little intricacy about swimming. They're going to know I'm a great swimmer because they see me doing it. We try to win people over with our knowledge, with our arguments, our disagreements, with our accomplishments. Jesus says, love like I love. You want the world to recognize you're my disciples? Guess what? Most of us really need an attitude change and a heart change. Because it isn't by our knowledge, by our disagreements, by what church we're a part of, that's going to show anyone that we're his disciples. Again, by this, everyone will know that you're my disciples. If you have love for one another. It's by our love. We didn't get into all of James because that would take quite a while. But James says to have faith without works is useless. It cannot save. It's ineffective. And it's dead. Again, James says to have faith without works is useless. It cannot save. It's ineffective. And it's dead. I don't want to be dead. I don't want to be ineffective or useless. I'm sure you don't either. And we weren't made to stay as we are. Are we growing? Are we loving? What are our words like? And are those words matched by our actions? I want to be more and more like Jesus, reflecting our Father's character. Don't you? Mm-hmm. That we would be connected to our true vine, that we would abide in Him, that we would become more and more like our greatest love. Lord, most of us know so much. We've heard so many sermons and read your word, but yet how much of it has actually, Lord, been put into practice? So we ask that we would not merely be hearers, Lord, but that we would be doers, that your character would be formed in us, that we would have your heart, that we would have your mindset, that we would be made in your image, Lord, and that we would love like you love. That people would know that we're your disciples, not because of how much we know or how much we can argue, Lord, but because of your love working its perfect way in us. Perfect love drives out fear, Lord. Let your perfect love drive out fear in our lives and our relationships. May we be people who are moved in you, as you move in and through us, God. Have your way. Exalt you, Lord.